1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, hello, internet world. This is Norma Joe. So, remember Cyril? I think I read the first part of Cyril like fucking a month ago or some shit like that in the car. But I was just gonna throw this in the bonfire, but I actually want to read more. So, we'll see. I think this is where it left off last time. I'm not sure, so okay. Raising his head once more, he took notice of where he was. It was a large parlor hall, larger than what seemed possible by the sight of the cabin outside. 2 animals stood in the middle of the parlor before him, and his flesh jumped with fear. They were stuffed, mounted, but somehow not lifeless, not quite. Man, I'm reading The Shining right now. It's very similar to those hedge animals. The bear and coyote stared back at him. The veil of sleep came over Cyril, as if the breath was stolen right out of his mouth. He stood wavering on his feet, blinking a few times, fighting the invitation to sleep. His eyelids were too heavy. They were 1,000 pounds of sand on each one, and on his head, shoulders, back, and legs. His dark eyes closed at last, and he collapsed down onto the ground. Wake up, man. A voice was urging him. A hand was shaking Cyril awake. It seemed to him that no time had passed. The sleep on him was still as heavy as it had been before. Cyril answered with the softest groan, and just very slightly raised up his head. But he could scarcely will his eyes to open. He was still mostly blind. His body was numb and sticky with filth. The clothes and his every muscle felt as heavy as lead. His own bones were weighing him down to the floor, but before he could even will himself to raise onto his hands and knees, somehow someone else was already pulling him up to his feet. The weight of standing, the vertigo of his own small stature. Cyril was so exhausted he no longer fit into his own body. He was too small and minute within his human shell. Don't urge me, he wanted to tell this stranger who was hurrying him along so feverishly. I'll trip, I'll fall, just leave me to rot like a body in a bag. By this time he realized that his legs had been moving and he was out into the hallway with the urgent stranger. The light was accommodatingly dim, and he could open his eyes just a little. The rich, dark chocolate red of the carpet was the first thing he saw, and the bottom of the brown hallway wall disintegrating into darkness. Come on, man, move, the stranger urged, whispering. Do you want the housemaster to come and strip you down? What? Cyril murmured back. He turned his head. For a moment, through his hazy, squinted eyes, he spotted fur, tan claws. His hair stood on end. His flesh became like ice. The paw of the coyote. But then he blinked, and the paw was gone. In its place was a lanky man's hand, clutching his shoulder, shuffling him along. Who, the headmaster? The housemaster, the stranger answered back ominously, and his deep, creaky voice only served to make it that much more eerie. Rapidly, in the dim candle-like darkness, they hurried into a room off the hallway. Cyril was pushed with haste, and he heard the door shut behind him. At last, his blood was flowing again. Cyril was awake enough to finally see. The bedroom was small, clean, not unlike an inn, although the pastel curtains and the red floor were a bit more flamboyant than anything he had seen before. A candle was burning on the desk, softly illuminating the room. The other man left his side and hurried to a door that Cyril assumed, as he looked around, belonged to a closet. But when the soft brown wood door was opened, a smaller room was inside, with a hard floor and a hook for hanging clothing and a bowl of water on a little table. A little washroom. The other man shoved Cyril inside and shut the door. Hey, Cyril turned quickly. Excuse me, he called. Excuse me. He grabbed the knob of the door and rattled it, but it was locked. Starting to go frantic, he banged with his open palms on the wood. Hey, let me out. What are you doing? You can't. Quiet, the other man hissed back. Shh, quiet, he's coming. He? Cyril didn't know who he was, but some unknown sense told him to take heed, beware, and he went silent. Looking down at his grimy, mud-soaked clothing, he finally stripped out of his jacket. Dying now to get out of the rest of his clothes, he looked into the basin of water and then froze. Footsteps were outside the door, and he heard the main door of the bedroom open and shut with the patience of purpose. The other man, the one whose room they were in, was alone now, sitting mute, his lanky hands folded in his lap. He was a blond, straight-haired sort of gentleman, with small, neat facial hair and fair blue large eyes set in his long, slightly equine face. A stark contrast to Cyril's jet-black hair, thick molasses-brown eyes, and small stature. This man was tall, but as he sat on the edge of the bed, neatly at quiet attention, and looking up, he didn't seem very tall at all. A new voice spoke after a drawn-out silence. a new voice that Cyril had never heard, but somehow it made the hair on his body prickle into goosebumps. I thought I heard some sort of a struggle in here. Struggle? The blonde laughed, more convincingly casual than Cyril thought himself would be capable of. No, I didn't hear it. You didn't, huh? Well, I'm kind of surprised, to be honest. Although authoritative, the man spoke with a crudity that Cyril was not too familiar with. He yearned desperately for a keyhole or some crack in the door, anything to let him peep in on the bedroom and get a glimpse of this chilling chief without surrendering his own position. I heard it clearly, the man went on. I heard your voice too. I heard your voice too, Thrush, talking with someone. Oh, the blonde man waved it off with one hand, trying to make light of it again. I was merely rambling, just muttering to myself. I'm surprised you heard me at all, to be honest. Uh-huh. Cyril could almost imagine him on the other side of the door. Almost could picture the stern expression, the hands on belted hips, the glowering eyes pinning Thrush down against the tightly fixed sheets of the bed. Well, you won't mind if I take a look around, he said in a statement. There was no room for questioning. Immediately, Cyril darted away from the door where he had practically been pressing his ear. He pushed himself back against the back wall in this small closet of a washroom. No sooner had he moved than there was the sick click of a hand gripping the knob, turning it from outside. Do you not trust me? Came Thrush's voice then. There was no creaking of the mattress. He didn't dare to stiffen or rise from the bed. His voice was soft, with a mask of plaintiveness, when it was clear that it was really a challenge she was offering. Excuse me? The hand let go of the washroom knob. Cyril still didn't yet dare to let out his held breath. Well, I just thought, Thrush began, because you, as we know, regard trust so highly. There was a small shifting of fabric as the blonde turned just slightly towards the man. It would be odd, to say the least, not to give the same courtesy that you request, wouldn't it? I say, there is nothing of interest here, and you would not call me a liar, would you? A long silence followed. Cyril felt as if the split in his throat had turned... the spit in his throat had turned to stone, and his body was pinned to the wall, unable to budge, swallow, or hardly breathe, until at last the man's reply came. All right, Fancy, he muttered. What the hell am I supposed to do when you start talking all English like that? Fine, I'll trust you. Don't forget that I did this for you, Thrush. Then, with a few short footsteps and the reverberation of a shutting door, he was gone. Cyril peeled himself off the back wall and nearly hit the floor. He was exhausted. His body had gone from stone to jelly. He pushed his wobbly legs to the basin of water sitting on the table and feverishly went to stripping off his clothes. He ripped the jacket and shirt from his body, throwing them crumpled inside out onto the floor. The freezing air of the tiny room dappled all down his bare back as he tore off his belt, out of his shoes, pants, and undergarments. Oh, how good it felt to be naked and free of the weight of that filth. The cold, crisp air was like feathers against his salty, mud-streaked skin. As quick as he could, he cupped his shivering hands into the icy water and smoothed it all down his face, cleansing away the dirt and grime. Suddenly the door opened, and Cyril leapt back so violently in electric fear that he whacked his knuckles against the edge of the bowl, making a low gong-like resounding bang and almost knocking the water off the table. He moved his hands quickly to cover himself up, though he saw then that it was only Thrush in the doorway. The blond man only glimpsed him a moment before turning his back for privacy and re-shutting the door, leaving it just a crack open so they could speak clearly to one another. He's gone, Cyril spoke. That was very clever of you. I thought for sure he would find me, he said as he quickly continued washing his face and body. He already knows you're here, Thrush responded. He was only humoring me. The housemaster knows everything that goes on within this place. And what is this place? Cyril couldn't help but ask. To that, Thrush couldn't help but chuckle, low and quietly. That is exactly what everyone here has been trying to figure out ever since we appeared here. Cyril turned quickly towards the door. It's a madhouse, he whispered. But I'm not... It is not, Thrush answered back. Is it like any madhouse you've heard of? No, it is not. But that doesn't mean you aren't mad. Cyril could not answer back to that. He merely stared back with a silent, quizzical expression. Finish washing up, Thrush murmured them urgently. I'll give you my clothes to wear. They're not the right fit, but better too big than too small, until the housemaster gives you a new pair your size." "How would he know my size?" Cyril asked, fervently rinsing the dirt and mud from his legs. "He hasn't even met me." "He knows everything about you, and each one of us. Don't make that mistake, Cyril. Don't underestimate his power." He stood in the washroom, the last of the water just dregs and muddy at the bottom of the bowl. He was as clean as he was going to get, he figured. "And how do you know my name?" he asked, through the cracked open door. "I don't think we've met before." ... or it's like XXXX, like change of time. Thrush poked his head out of the bedroom door and glanced left and right. Finding just an empty hall, he quickly hurried out into the burgundy carpet and ushered Cyril with him. Cyril picked lightly at the two large clothes. Not since he was a child had he been dressed so ridiculously, but at least it was clothes he was familiar with, and in truth, Thrush was only a little bit larger, a head taller, but not too much wider. "Let's go down to the common room," Thrush said then, heading off down the hall. "Introduce yourself to the others before the headmaster does it for you." "What exactly will the headmaster do?" Cyril couldn't help but to ask then. "If he catches me." "It's not a matter of catching," Thrush answered. "It's more a matter of catching up, you see." To that, Cyril just looked at him quizzically. "It's just best to do things yourself around here," he said, "if you want to have the freedom to do them like a man and not a puppet." Before Cyril could ask him another question, or gather his thoughts well enough to think of what to ask, the hall all of a sudden ended. The repetitive view of door after door after door gave way now to an open common room, and some part of Cyril's memory flashed back to his arrival there, falling down on the dark floor and peering terrified up at the two stuffed beasts, although now that he looked around clearer there were no trace of them. It seemed to be, to his eyes almost, like some sort of high-class dressing room behind the stage at a playhouse. The ceiling was high, there were a couple of tables, chairs, and couches, and a few decorations, but unlike a real playhouse, there were no mirrors, no desks, no pieces of clothing strewn around hurriedly all over, but there were the actors. "Are you sleeping, Chubb?" The dog is dreaming. They had to be actors, didn't they? Of some kind, at least. What else could explain how odd they looked, and how they were all turning their heads to peer at him, pausing their previous actions like puppets frozen in time? There was a woman he could see clearly from where he stood. She was seated in an armchair, needlepoint rested in her hand. She was a little older than him, it seemed, but not elderly. Her black hair was pulled into a bun in the back of her head. She had an ordinary enough look, but her clothing was so old, not falling apart but old-fashioned, the dark gray button dress that fell from the tight throat line down to her shoes. Then there was a man. Cyril could, there's a fucking song here. Here, you want to hear the song? "Bad news today in the big headline. Bring tomorrow already and another try. Armies marching on my town. Whiskey to forget isn't easy to down. Wish I had a car so I could drive away. Wish I had revenge so I could make them pay. Wish I had the power to reverse the law. Ain't got nothing I can do at all. You know times are bad when your comfort is. It was already messed up before all this. Speaking your troubles won't do you good, 'cause the brainwashed masses won't hear a word. Wish I had a lover we could run away. Wish I knew a faraway place I could stay. Wish I had distraction so it wouldn't matter. Weakest to strongest, we're all going to only assume." Oh, okay. That was the song. Okay, there was a man. Cyril could only assume was her mate. But he did not look quite as old-fashioned. The man had black hair, a little facial hair. In truth, he did not look too different than Cyril himself. His face was narrower, his eyes rounder, and all over more feminine type of appearance than a gentleman. Is that what makes you look feminine? A narrow face and round eyes? I don't know, maybe. Then there was a bigger man. Although his face looked actually quite young, his body was tall, strapping, and sturdy. He was clean-shaven, all but a few patches of pale peach fuzz blending into his fair peachy skin, and his hair was long and blonde, quite long, a bit past his round shoulders even. He had to be an actor, Cyril thought to himself. He must. Most unusual of all were his clothes. His shirt was no shirt, but a tunic, as if in medieval times, and he looked intently at Cyril, from over the top of a couch on which he was sitting and resting his elbow on the top edge. Something about his blue gaze stuck into the heart of Cyril. So odd, so alien, staring and alien. The gazes of the others fixed him as well, but that blonde, strapping man. Cyril backed away, subtly, a few small steps back towards the doorway, and feeling slightly faint, backed straight into a sturdy figure just behind him. Well, welcome. Glad you've decided to join us, Mr. Pearson. Cyril spun around in a heartbeat, and he already knew what he would find. That voice from earlier in the bedroom, from the corner of his eye. He could see that Thrush was gone, vanished somewhere, dissolved into the wall. Cyril found himself looking upon the captain. Now he's a captain, huh? He was a housemaster and a headmaster and all this shit. In silence, he stepped back slowly and quiet. He could see the power in the man, the grounded force in his calm eyes, the storm he commanded at his own whim, within the grasp of wreathed hands, the gray beard, so sturdy, in a simple, unimposing way that Cyril felt his own unreliable body melting into jelly before him. Oh, look, here's a picture of this homeless guy that I saw one time with his dick wrapped around a pole. Like, I seriously saw this. I'm not kidding. What does it say on this side of the paper? Do you think that this will all build up in a big finale? Like, you are the universe. Big motivational speaker moment. Alright, we got some maps. What is this? This is like an upside down page. Entirely light years from any tourist destination, the hale planet of IX3804-TT. So unloved of a place that it didn't even get a proper name. But Cito was 28 now, and more than half his life ago he had left that misfit behind. Left it to go dashing all across the galaxy and eventually come here, to this dark, smoldering freighter, reeking like sweat with a star-headed youth. Cito had all the classic looks of someone who came from the cold side of where he was from. Slightly narrow, almond-shaped eyes, smooth. I think this is a roleplay character intro. Dusty skin and no beard nor stubble, since the men usually didn't grow it there, and it was anyone's guess why. His brown hair was slick and straight, coming down just long enough to see what I mean about, like, I used to love describing characters. Now that joy is all gone. The fucking world we live in, you know. The auburn shade that tinged both his hair and eyes alike was a little exotic for him. Usually his people had it the color of a rock sapling, no red involved, or maybe he had picked it up somewhere. They sat in the dark and sweated into their trash clothes. Cito had a black folded up length of canvas strapped to his back, almost like a very flat rolled up carpet, but it was made of some leather and not like a carpet at all. To be fair, they couldn't be entirely blamed for the sour scent on their clothes either. The scent was theirs, but the rest was mostly the result of other encounters, and their sleepy twinkling eyes and the glow of their skin. They were packing more than a leather roll within their bodies. They were downright high. That's funny. Alright, now what we got next? There was like some little, oh, this is kind of sad. It's like, okay, look at this little, so he's like blowing bubbles, right? To a little baby or something? And he's like stirring the bubbles, and there's like an old man, or old person in a wheelchair, and it says, I wish I had that kind of energy. And then this little one says, like, I'm sure there was a time when you did, and then stirs more, and then like dumps it out, and there's only one drop left, and he says, it all gets used up so fast. That's so fucking sad. God, that's so fucking sad. I used to draw these little like fetus looking creatures all the time, because it's like, it's just something no one can complain about, you know? They can't say, oh, you're not having enough diversity or whatever, when you have a little fucking fetus dolphin looking animal. It's like, no one's gonna bitch about that. Alright, what is this? They glanced around once, then once more again. Finally deciding that the coast was clear, the pair darted out from behind one cargo vessel and across the docking hangar, which reeked of corroded iron, fuel exhaust, and of course that tangy, toxic sanitizer spray. The hangar was full of ships, and no doubt most of them filled with similar things, but they only had eyes for this one. Cyril rolled up the cargo door with the powerful heft of his skinny body. As soon as it opened for them, well, speaking of eyes, his own glittered like the shining brown pelt of a wild wolvenoon, a species that, of course, had been hunted nearly to extinction in his galaxy. And being hunted was something that Cedo knew a thing or two about. At least he liked to think he did. Not to be vain, he might say, but a thing was a thing. Baby, I think we hit the jackpot. Oh, it's 20 minutes, okay.